So today I'm joined by Jack O Meara, co-founder and CEO of Oxford Biotech, OchreBio. So welcome, Jack.
Thank you very much. Very few people get my surname right on the first time, so bravo, Tim.
Yeah. It's all in the research. It's all in the research. There's that little microphone thing on LinkedIn that kind of gives you the audio. So no, very, very useful.
I'm glad.
And just on that, actually, just on your LinkedIn, just doing that little bit of preliminary, I noticed that you started life in some various kind of, let's say, left field roles. I think busker and barman were two that kind of stick in my mind. I don't know quite how you made it from being a not very good busker. I think the description is to where you are today.
Yeah, my singing career was never going to take off, so I decided it was probably worthwhile pivoting. And then liver disease was also something I felt was a worthwhile goal.
Very much so. Very much so.
Given the barman time, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, welcome. I know that you guys, you were just chatting off camera that you guys were funded, I think, in the middle part of last year. So, really worthwhile cause of fighting liver disease. I guess both here in the UK and international. I guess these problems occur globally. It's not just limited to a UK issue.
Absolutely, it's particularly in the industrialized world, it's the third leading cause of premature death. It's a very global problem. Particularly in China, there's a big issue with liver disease. The Asian population tends to suffer slightly more than the West, but it's definitely a global issue. As we all live longer and eat crappier foods, our liver gets under more and more pressure, and then liver disease becomes more and more prevalent. And there hasn't really been any successful treatments to date for patients. So we're hoping the work that we're doing here in Oxford and globally, we've got teams in New York and Taiwan, can actually really make a big impact on a global scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So I noticed actually, looking through some of the information online that you guys, liver disease is actually still the only disease in the top 10 killers that is on the increase globally, which I thought was actually quite a startling statistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think fortunately for society at large, we've made a lot of headway, particularly if you think about things like cancer treatments 10 years ago, where we had a different place than where we are today. But and even sort of metabolic treatments and so on and so forth. But liver hasn't had that success. It really hasn't. It's been a little bit of a neglected space. There is sort of a stigma associated with liver disease, which maybe influences investment in the field to some extent. But it's a massive issue, I mean, so many families and people are affected by it to some extent, and we're hoping to be able to make a real impact.
So, talking at a high level, because I'm not a medical person, I'm interested in scaling companies, investment, and founders' journeys. But at a high level, what is it that you guys are achieving, or the research that you're conducting that makes a difference in this really important area?
Yeah, look, I think when we started the business 4 years ago now, we really sort of took a look at liver disease and tried to figure out why have we, as a pharmaceutical sector, not really been able to make much of an impact here at all. And we identified 3 big reasons that we thought were the challenges we wanted to try and address as we set up the company and set up our own sort of approach. The first is that the biology is still not very well understood. So even in academic circles, we still don't really have a good idea of what is driving the disease. We know there's certain sociological factors that drive it, but at a scientific and a cellular level, what's going on? So we use a lot of these new genomic technologies, things like you may have heard of single cell sequencing, these kind of new tools that really zoom in on the disease and try and understand it at a cellular level, what's happening and what could be ways to treat it. So that was the first thing we spent a lot of time and resources, particularly in the early days of the company, investing heavily in. The second thing was, okay, let's say you find a new potential driver of the disease and make a new medicine. The models that we've been using to date to test those medicines, they just don't work. Animal models just don't really recapitulate human disease at all, frankly. There's been hundreds of drugs tested in clinical trials for liver disease. They've all failed. but they all worked in a mouse at some point. So, there's something wrong with the mouse. It's not telling us what we need to know if it's giving us complete false positive. So we try to deprioritize animal studies and prioritize human tissue-based testing. So we take discarded tissues that can't be used for transplant or otherwise, and we test out our medicines in actual human disease tissue. And we think that gives us a better chance of success when we get into actually human testing. We're making drugs for humans, not mice. We should be focusing on human disease. And then the last thing, and this is a slightly more nuanced point, but the problem with liver disease as well is that patients don't often know they have the disease for a very long time. And as a result, clinical trials are very hard to recruit for. They have to be very large, very well powered, and that makes them quite expensive to run. So we try to find sort of niche, smaller diseases that are well categorized, that we can get to proof of principle quickly in before then going after the much larger diseases. So we think liver transplantation is a great place where we can have a big impact, improve outcomes for liver transplant patients, and in doing so, prove our medicines work, and then use that to sort of stepping stone our way into much larger kind of chronic liver disease indications as well.
Okay. So how prevalent is what you're doing in other disease areas, like for example heart disease and things like that? So for example, if you have a heart disease, a transplant, someone was suffering with that condition, how is there other organizations doing something similar, or are there other strategies for heart disease, or is this something that you're already pioneering from a liver perspective?
So I think it's fair to say we're really pioneering this concept of testing out drugs in whole organs that can't be used for transplant as a new way of thinking about translational development or getting medicines into the clinic. I think that's fair to say, and we're doing a lot of really exciting science to help get us there, and pioneering in the liver. Now, there's maybe two ways to think about the answer to that. The one is, could this be done for heart disease? Could someone take discarded or unusable heart for transplant and then test out medicines there? Absolutely, and we would celebrate anyone that takes a similar approach and really pioneers it in another disease area. And we may even down the road, with sufficient resources, start thinking about, can we do the same thing we've done for liver for other disease areas as well? That's sort of a longer term strategy. But then the other question is there anything that we're doing in liver disease that actually could have impact in heart disease setting? And something that people don't really, I didn't really think a lot about until I got more into this field, is that the body is so interconnected, right? All of our internal organs they're not independent entities that work completely in silo. They all affect each other in a very collective way. And actually, one of the things you realize as you start to study the liver is that if you can improve liver health, so improve liver metabolism, improve the ability to break down fats and sort of monitor blood pressure and so forth, you actually, by virtue of doing that, have a much better impact on heart health, because your circulatory system is cleaner, you're under less stress. You're actually oftentimes you can think about reducing the risk of heart attacks by improving your liver, which is kind of the engine of your metabolism, or the brain of your metabolism. So there is all these additional positive impacts that you can have by really studying and doing good in liver disease, which hasn't been which no one has been able to do before. So anyway, so that's all part of the thinking that's going on within OchreBio.
So hugely important area, as we said a moment ago. Like, how closely are you associated with some of the big pharma and biotech companies? Do you see those guys as deeply competitive, or are these kind of some of the larger institutions in this space, so that they also kind of maybe either routes to market or partners of OchreBio?
Yeah, it's a really weird sector in some ways when you think about tech and others, in that your competitor becomes your partner, becomes your competitor, becomes your partner, because it's so interconnected, and because the development timeline for medicines to get to patients is so long and so costly, you have to work together to figure out ways to get these things forward. So even though there's others working in different approaches to liver disease that could be considered as competitive products, ultimately we'll likely lean on a large pharma as we get further down our development path to help us manufacture at scale and commercialize at scale the products that we're discovering now, and ultimately get them to as many people and as far and wide across the globe as we talked about at the beginning, because it is a global issue, and there's only so much machine power a small company has to really reach that kind of wider audience. So anyway, so that we definitely will collaborate with larger partners. We haven't done a lot of it today. We've done some small projects with big pharma, but we've been very independent thus far. But I would hope to see that change as we mature as an organization, as our products mature as therapeutics.
Really interesting. So if you think about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you took $30 million in Series A, was that right?
That's right, yeah.
And how many investors participated in the round?
So we've got an unusual cap table, actually, in that we've got quite a wide range of different investors that we bring in. And look, I think it's great, because a lot of folks that we brought in even are entrepreneurs themselves, or people who've been in sort of founded companies themselves and helped to grow similar business in the healthcare space. So even though they might be small investors in the grand scheme of the $30 million, they can have an outsized impact on the company by virtue of providing counsel, advice, or introductions, and so forth. So I think we probably had close to 20 to 30 investors all in, and that includes some of the more individual sort of personalities who contributed to the round as well. But it was 4 or 5 large investors that made up the most of the round.
Okay, and for that fund, obviously what you described earlier in the meeting is, it sounds huge, right? So it sounds like a massive undertaking. Where does the Series A get you to? At what point do you need more, and what's your kind of strategy for profitability, I guess, in this as an organization? Like where are you at on that kind of journey?
Yeah, well, look, every business needs to be thinking about if you're going to ask for all this money and do all this work, how are you going to make money today? So for us, our journey and our milestones with this Series A financing is really to continue the discovery process to the point of nominating a few drug candidates for human testing. So do all of the preclinical research needed to really move products actually now into the clinic, which is a really big milestone and transition point for a company like ourselves. So we're almost there, actually. In the next few months, we're going to begin nominating drug candidates for final, what's called IND enabling studies, or final workups before we go through a regulatory approval for human testing. So that's a really exciting sort of milestone to be heading into. And then the Series B financing that we'll do will be really to move those medicines through human testing, prove out the concept, prove out the thesis that we can find new biology, validate new biology, make better medicines. And then subsequent to that, we'll look to raise money to bring additional products into clinical testing for a wider range of disease. You mentioned sort of things like heart disease. Is there things that we could do beyond just sort of liver transplantation to begin with? And in terms of how we ultimately sort of pay back all our investors plus some for our success, we ultimately, the likely scenario is that we would partner along the way to sell some of our research or sell some of our discoveries to a larger partner, or ultimately get acquired by a large pharmaceutical. That's very typical in the biotechnology space, where you do a lot of the discovery research and then ultimately get acquired by a larger partner. But ultimately, what I would love to see happen, and this is a little bit speculative, and let's see how the world sort of shakes out over the next few years, is that we build a really big differentiated business and go the whole way and build up multiple products that go on to impact lives at a really large scale. There's been a lot of change in the pharmaceutical industry at large, where there's some new startup companies that have gone on to great sizes. I mean, people have heard of Moderna because of the vaccines and everything, but there's companies like Vertex and Alnylam that 20 years ago were tiny little companies like us, and 20 years later are bigger market caps than GSK. They're massive organizations. And I'd love for Ochre to be a European or a UK example of a company that really grows and builds great people, that builds great products, that is a sort of a new age big pharma company. So let's see how the next kind of couple of decades play out, but that's the vision.
No, it's phenomenal and inspiring to hear the ambition. So absolutely, take on the world, take on a hugely important challenge, and build a business. I mean, that's kind of the fundamentals of a lot of dreams of people do when they start out. So no, it's refreshing to hear the kind of the long-term play.
Yeah, I think so. And it drives economy, you create amazing value for the people that work here and their families and the ecosystem and society at large. I think we need some more entrepreneurial energy in this part of the world, and to really kind of compete at a global level. So that's sort of that's the thesis. Yeah.
That's great to hear. No, I think we were actually initially connected because we were doing some research and doing some engagement with Oxford scale-ups, and
Okay.
seen a significant trend of kind of scaling organizations and funding actually in the last 12 months in Oxford as a location. So what's Oxford been like for you in terms of, a home base? I'm guessing you've got access to some strong talent network around there with regard to the uni. Like how have you found the scale up journey up until this point in Oxfordshire?
Yeah, look, I think Oxford is a phenomenal place to start a company. There is amazingly intelligent people in this part of the world, way smarter than me, which is intimidating to come into work. But it's great to be able to recruit people, such hardworking, motivated and intelligent people. That's a really big value add for the space. In addition, there's a lot of supports, and there's beginning to build a bit of a community, particularly for life sciences companies around the sector, and that sort of formation of sort of community and networks, and sort of has this sort of catalytic effect where you start to share learnings and kind of grow as an ecosystem. So having more and more companies build and grow in this ecosystem will just drive more and more of energy and lessons learned, and sort of more battle scars to share across the overall community itself. And I've had a really positive experience. The only thing I would say is there's not a lot of scale up capital in Oxford. There's a bit of startup capital, but there isn't that depth of sort of scale up capital, and a lot of that still is really in the US. So you got to be thinking, for us, if you're going to have those kind of ambitions that we just talked about, you got to think about how do you fund those ambitions, and really you're going to fund them through US investors typically. So that's why we try to build a bridge to having a site in the US, having some of our leadership team and our board in the US. All that sort of helps, I think, to ultimately achieve the ambitions we set out to.
Where would be a kind of a natural landing spot for you guys in the US? Is that kind of an East Coast, like Ivy League?
East Coast, yeah. Well, we have a research group in New York, actually. But a lot of which was a bit of an unusual choice, a lot of the biotech activity is out of Boston, where it's such a competitive ecosystem in Boston. It's really it's so overpriced and on top of each other. So when we sort of did an assessment of where we wanted to position ourselves, New York is sort of a blossoming biotech sector. It's sort of nascent, and we thought getting our boots on the ground in a place that's sort of taken off is a nice way to not get chewed up by the sharks in a place like Boston, and be able to find your own niche and grow with the ecosystem itself. So that's a cool city too, right?
Yeah, of course it is. No, I think there's a lot to be said for that. You're finding a kind of a softer landing spot, and then having less of the competitive edge, when just as you're fledgling and getting started. I think it makes a lot of sense. But as you say, there's also a lot of talent available in New York and East Coast generally, and Boston to New York, as you know, isn't a huge stretch by any imagination. So
exactly,
I think
right.
it's a good spot.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So what does the next kind of 6 to 12 months look like, Jack? What's kind of priority for you guys now?
Yeah, priority number one is getting our drug candidate nominated to move into sort of clinical readiness mode and really transition the company from discovery through to impact in patients at scale with differentiated products. So that's a really exciting milestone for the business. And the other thing we're doing a lot of right now, which is starting to bear some interesting fruit, is business development with large pharma. I mentioned we haven't done any major deals to date with pharmaceutical partners, but we think it's about around the right. We're at the stage of maturity now where we can more seriously engage in collaboration discussions. So we're having some really promising conversations with large pharma about ways to collaborate to move forward our technology and our products.
Okay, you mentioned you kind of advisory board a moment ago. Is that something you're building, or does that come via investors? How do you go about that endeavor?
Yeah, no, we have a very rich sort of scientific advisory board of expertise across the liver disease sort of spectrum, and then we have a board of directors which provides more governance support for the company. So between the two of those, we're probably the most advised company in Oxford, I'd say. We've got tons of external advisors, which is great. I mean, we bring really smart people into the organization that way.
Good stuff. What have you enjoyed most so far on your journey till this point?
It's a really hard job, and it forces you to. You have to adapt to the role. Like, I think being a CEO and a founder is a really it necessitates a certain type of, you got to be a certain person in the role, and I think that's it's you got to separate yourself. I don't know. I felt I've grown into the role a lot and kind of been on a personal journey to get more comfortable with what it requires. And as the company changes, the role changes. So while it was necessary for me to be a real sales guy at the beginning, telling the story, the vision, helping to raise money, as the company's gotten bigger and more stable, and we're making big product decisions, now it's more about being a strategist and being an excellent communicator and making sure everyone knows what's going on and making sure we're all sort of swimming in the same direction towards the one goal. So though I think that journey has been a really interesting one. And a really just rewarding experience to be able to meet and work with such inspiring, motivated, highly intelligent people towards a really big, ambitious goal. I guess I always thought, if you're going to go for something, go for the big one, like if we're going to try and solve a problem, solve a fucking global problem, so anyway, so that keeps me motivated, and that's been really really fun. But yeah, it's if you're a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs on your call, I think just know it's a hard job. You're going to be we're working really hard all the time. So that's the only thing that I've been aware of. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And final question from my side. So advice, given what you've just described, thinking about someone going on their journey, maybe to get to even seed or to A-round financing or investment, what would you one piece of advice you'd give?
Look, I think it's all about relationships with the people you're in the day-to-day with. I think invest heavily in the relationships and be really candid and honest about how, what you're feeling and thinking as you're in the weeds and in the trenches together, because you gotta get on. You gotta be able to really, roll up and work together, or it just becomes, it becomes unnecessarily difficult. And then also ask for advice. I think there's a lot of really smart people who've done this before. And a lot of those people are really kind. They can empathize with your struggle and the journey you're going to go on. So build a personal advisory board even beyond the company, and peer mentors as well are great because they're in it with you. They're having the same challenges, even if it's a different company, different sector. It's all people. You're all trying to get everyone to work together. A lot of those lessons learned are super transferable, and then have fun. I think the other thing is, you can get so wound up about this issue and this person doesn't like it and that. And it's like, you're going to be in it for a long time. It's a really hard job. Enjoy the little moments. And when you get wins, sort of celebrate them and have a bit of fun with it, because it's a long slog. Yeah.
Well said. And I do think that, someone like yourself who's on that journey of such a huge goal at the end, as you just described, being able to have fun along the way makes perfect sense. And if you can do that and genuinely enjoy it along the way, then well done to you. Because I think you found your calling in life.